When the doors to Frank Fritz's private garage were finally opened, no one could have predicted what secrets lay hidden inside. Among the dust, oil, and relics collected over a lifetime, investigators stumbled upon something unexpected, something that hinted at a secret deal Frank had quietly kept buried for years. What they discovered inside didn't just surprise them. It shattered everything they thought they knew about him. And when the truth finally came to light, it left everyone stunned and speechless. Long before television fame and long before the world knew his name, Frank Fritz was simply a curious boy from Davenport, Iowa. He wasn't the kind of kid who followed the crowd or spent afternoons chasing balls across fields. Instead, Frank found joy in the forgotten corners of life. Attics filled with old furniture, sheds full of forgotten tools, and dusty shelves stacked with objects no one cared about anymore. While others saw junk, Frank saw history. To him, each broken item was a treasure waiting to be understood. A piece of someone's story waiting to be saved. Growing up in an ordinary neighborhood with modest means, Frank learned to find magic in the mundane. His bedroom looked more like a miniature museum than a child's room. Rocks, stamps, bottles, and trinkets filled every inch of space. Each object was carefully labeled, loved, and displayed with pride. From a young age, he seemed to understand that every item had a past worth preserving, and he made it his mission to rescue those forgotten fragments of history before they disappeared forever. As he got older, Frank followed a more traditional path, taking a steady job as a fire inspector. It was honorable, respectable work, but it didn't satisfy his restless spirit. Every alarm he responded to reminded him of how short life really was and how much he longed to spend it doing something he loved. On weekends and days off, he would drive across Iowa visiting garage sales and roadside stands, talking to people about the forgotten treasures hidden away in barns and basement. His warm, easygoing nature made him trustworthy, and people often let him buy things they hadn't planned to part with. It was during this time that Frank met Mike Wolfe, a fellow Ian who shared his love for antiques and adventure. Their bond was instant and natural. Together, they hit the open road, scouring the Midwest for vintage signs, rusted gas pumps, motorcycles, and pieces of Americana that most people had overlooked. Mike had the big dreams and business vision, while Frank brought humor, honesty, and heart. They weren't just pickers, they were storytellers preserving the soul of forgotten America. Their chemistry and passion eventually caught the attention of the History Channel, and in 2010, American Pickers was born. The show wasn't about fancy antiques or priceless artifacts. It was about people, memories, and the emotional value behind each find. Viewers instantly connected with Frank's charm. His laugh was contagious, his flannel shirts iconic, and his kindness genuine. He didn't act like a TV star because he didn't want to be one. He was simply himself. Every rusted toy car or vintage sign he found felt personal, and fans loved him for it. While Mike often pursued high-value deals, Frank gravitated towards sentimental items, things that evoked nostalgia and emotion. That balance between the two men created the magic that made American Pickers special. But behind the smiles and laughter, cracks were beginning to form. Years of travel and lifting heavy antiques began to take a toll on Frank's body. Chronic back pain and his lifelong battle with Crohn's disease made filming increasingly difficult. Even when hustled on screen, those close to him could see how much pain he was silently enduring. Eventually, his absences became more noticeable and fans began asking questions. Online discussions turned into rumors. Some said he was recovering from surgery. Others hinted at disagreements with Mike. Both men stayed quiet for a long time, letting speculation grow. When Mike finally addressed it, he explained that Frank was focusing on his health. It was a polite statement, but the distance between them was obvious. Frank later revealed that he hadn't heard from Mikey in a long while, not even after his surgery. That silence hurt deeply. For two men who had shared countless miles and memories, fame had become a wall they couldn't climb over. As the years went on, Frank's world began to shrink. Away from the cameras, he faced health struggles that grew harder to manage. His Crohn's disease worsened and the physical pain became overwhelming. After leaving American Pickers, he hoped to focus on recovery, maybe start smaller projects closer to home. But instead, he grew increasingly isolated. Friends noticed he was drinking more, battling addiction, and withdrawing from public life. His once bright spirit seemed dimmed by loneliness and regret. Then came the tragedy that changed everything. In July 2022, Frank suffered a massive stroke at his Iowa home. AFRIN found him unresponsive and called for help. He was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was severe. His speech, movement, and independence were all affected. Within weeks, a court-appointed guardian and conservator were assigned to manage his medical care and finances. The man who once traveled freely across America was now confined, dependent, and fighting to survive. When Mike Wolfe broke his silence, his message was raw and emotional. He called Frank "me old friend" and asked fans to pray for him, admitting how deeply it hurt to see him in that state. For many, it was a reminder that despite fame, pride, and distance, their friendship had been real, and that love and regret often walk hand in hand. In the months and years that followed, updates on Frank's condition were scarce. Rumors circulated that he had passed away or was living in a care facility. Fans hoped for good news. But in early 2025, the heartbreaking confirmation arrived: Frank Fritz had died at the age of 60 following complications from his stroke. Yet, even in death, Frank's story wasn't over. When the doors of his garage finally creaked open again, what they found inside wasn't just a collection of metal, dust, and rust. It was the soul of the man himself. His private garage in Iowa wasn't a warehouse. It was a time capsule, a living tribute to a lifetime of passion and curiosity. Inside, rows of motorcycles lined the walls, some fully restored, others mid-project, each one representing a chapter of his life. The air was thick with oil, dust, and nostalgia, as if time had stopped to honor him. Every shelf, every tool, every artifact told a story. It wasn't about money or fame. It was about love for history, for craftsmanship, and for the idea that even the most forgotten things deserve to be remembered. Frank Fritz's garage, like the man himself, was proof that true beauty often hides beneath layers of dust, waiting for someone with heart enough to see it. Inside Frank's garage, the atmosphere was like stepping back in time. Signs from old gas stations and roadside diners hung from the ceiling, their once bright colors now softly glowing under the light that filtered through the small, dusty windows. Tools were scattered everywhere. Wrenches, paint cans, and piles of repair manuals covered nearly every surface. It wasn't the kind of place designed for visitors or meant to impress anyone. This was a working man's space, a sanctuary of grease, grit, and craftsmanship. Time seemed to slow down inside those walls. Where others might chase after expensive sports cars, Frank preferred relics of Americana, bikes, trucks, and small classic cars that captured the spirit of the working class. He often explained in interviews that motorcycles were easier to restore and didn't take up much space, making them perfect for someone constantly searching for his next great find. Among his prized possessions were motorcycles that made enthusiasts' hearts race. He owned a 1940s Harley-Davidson Knucklehead, an icon of American Vikings' golden era, and a pair of restored Indian Chiefs from 1947 and 1952. Between 2015 and 2018, Frank proudly displayed these bikes at antique fairs in Iowa, where visitors admired their flawless restoration and timeless beauty. These machines weren't just for show. Frank worked on them himself, welding, sanding, and polishing until they roared back to life. Every bolt he turned reflected his deep love for craftsmanship and the joy of reviving the forgotten. The garage also housed cars that locals spoke of with awe. In the back sat his beloved 1956 Chevrolet Bear, painted in a striking red and white two-tone that turned heads wherever it went. Nearby rested a quirky 1966 Dodge A100 hot rod truck, the very one featured on American Pickers, where Frank's grin was as wide as the truck was small, and only he could squeeze behind the wheel. There was also a gleaming Cadillac Fleetwood from the 1960s, symbolizing a bygone era of American luxury, and a 1973 Volkswagen Beetle that neighbors often saw him drive through town. Each vehicle represented a chapter in his life, a reflection of his restless curiosity and endless appreciation for history on wheels. Local appraisers once estimated that Frank's collection was worth between $350,000 and $500,000 as reported by the Des Moines Register in 2020. but those who truly knew him understood that Frank didn't collect for profit. He collected for preservation. His garage wasn't filled with pristine museum pieces. It was filled with stories. Many of the vehicles were mid-restoration. Some waiting for parts, others kept simply because they reminded him of a person or a journey. After Frank suffered a stroke in 2022, a court-appointed conservator began cataloging everything he owned. Probate records from Scott County later confirmed a detailed inventory of motorcycles, cars, signs, and antique tools. No mysterious prototypes, noun-registered vehicles, despite the rumors. What they did find, however, painted a vivid portrait of a man who lived for the thrill of discovery and the satisfaction of breathing life back into the forgotten. Friends often said Frank could lose entire days inside his garage, working quietly as the hum of old country music filled the air. He would tinker with engines, polish metal, and forget about time itself. For him, collecting was never about showing off or chasing wealth. It was about the sacred bond between man, machine, and memory. "Imminent hoarding," he once said. In preserving history, those words defined everything he stood for. After Frank's death, those who stepped into his garage described an eerie calm, as if his presence still lingered among the tools and treasures, and tucked away in a shadowed corner under a dust-covered tarp, was something that drew immediate attention. The shape beneath it was unfamiliar. Its curves and form unlike anything they had seen before. When the tarp was finally pulled back, silence filled the room. What lay beneath was astonishing, a car that seemed part legend, part mystery. Its body bore the muscular lines of a Corvette, but something about it was different. The stance was lower, the shape more aggressive, and the fiberglass shell didn't match any known factory design. It looked like something that shouldn't exist. As experts examined it, their intrigue turned to disbelief. The car had no VIN number in its usual spot. Instead, they discovered a small brass plate on the firewall, etched with the words "experimental use only." That single phrase changed everything. If true, it meant the car wasn't just rare. It was possibly never meant to be seen by the public. Some speculated that Frank had stumbled upon an unrecorded prototype linked to the legendary 1963 Corvette Grand Sport. Only 5 Grand Sports were ever officially built by General Motors. Each meticulously documented, yet this mysterious machine shared striking similarities. The wide arches, the racing stance, the unmistakable fiberglass body. Could Frank have uncovered a hidden 6th model that vanished from GM's records before anyone could document it? Pinned above his workbench right beside the car was a handwritten note that read, "I left behind everything there." No one ever figured out what Frank meant by that, but it deepened the mystery. How could a small-town picker have ended up with a car that might rewrite automotive history? Some whispered that he'd acquired it decades earlier through a secret deal with a retired GM engineer who had worked on experimental racing projects in the 1960s. Others believed Frank found it at a Michigan estate sale tied to a former GM factory worker's family. When the discovery hit the news, the story spread like wildfire. Car forums across the world exploded with debates. Some dismissed the find as a clever replica. Others swore it was the lost treasure of the century, a secret prototype GM had buried and forgotten. GM's silence only fueled the fire. They refused to issue a statement, leaving collectors and historians to speculate endlessly. Historians searched for any missing Grand Sport records or clues of an unlisted prototype, but no official documents surfaced. Still, whispers from former insiders hinted that GM's prototype division had occasionally built test cars. Vehicles that were never logged, some destroyed, some quietly disappearing into private hands. Perhaps Frank had found one of those ghosts from the past. Soon, collectors began reaching out to Frank's estate with staggering offers, some rumored tobe in the millions, but every offer was turned down. The mysterious Corvette-like car would not be sold. To this day, the truth remains elusive. Was it an authentic lost prototype, a remarkable replica, or something entirely different? What everyone agreed on was simple. Frank Fritz knew exactly what he had discovered. And in typical Frank fashion, he kept it secret, never boasting, never trying to profit from it. After his passing, fans, friends, and collectors began discussing how best to honor his legacy.
From those conversations, the idea of the Frank Fritz Foundation began to take shape, a museum or preservation center dedicated to his beliefs.